Pazuzu. He has the head of a lion dog, 4 wings, eagle talons for feet, a scorpion's tail, and a serpentine erect penis. And for over 1,000 years, people pressed his image against the skin of pregnant women as protection. Pazuzu was the Akkadian and Assyrian king of wind demons, lord of the southwest wind, the wind in Mesopotamia that arrived carrying locusts, fever, and famine. Everything about his iconography announces destruction. Nothing suggests mercy. Nothing suggests the remotest concern for human welfare. But archaeologists have recovered his amulets from sites across ancient Mesopotamia, dating to the 1st millennium BCE. His face appears on incantation bowls, on clay tablets, on bronze effigies built into the walls of homes. Women in labor wore him around their necks. His specific enemy was Lamashtu, the demon who preyed on pregnant women and newborns. And the ancient logic was exact. The only force terrifying enough to drive away something that terrible is something more terrible still. You did not worship Pazuzu. You conscripted him. This is the oldest and most honest theology of protection. Not that safety comes from goodness, but that the world contains forces of destruction, and the most practical response is to position a worse force between you and the one you cannot face alone. Modern security operates on the same logic. It just doesn't usually have a scorpion tail. The Gallu. They know no food. They know no drink. They accept no offerings. They feel no compassion. The Sumerians wrote that description of the Gallu, the underworld enforcers of the goddess Ereshkigal, with full awareness of what they were doing. The deliberate listing of everything that might soften a human, a god, or any being with interests is the precise definition of their terror. Not that they are cruel, that they are beyond appeal. They appear most memorably in the Descent of Inanna, one of the great surviving works of Sumerian literature, in copies dating to approximately 1900 to 1700 BCE. When the goddess Inanna is resurrected from the underworld, someone must take her place. She spots her husband Dumuzi seated comfortably on his throne, not mourning, not weeping, and turns her eye of death upon him. The Gallu drag him below. The text does not tell us what Dumuzi should have done. It tells us what he didn't do. The Gallu administered the consequence. They are not evil in the way a monster is evil. They are indifferent in the way death is indifferent. In the ancient world, that was the most honest theology there was. Humbaba. His face was not decorated with intestines. It was composed of them, a single coiling mass of entrails forming his entire countenance. And this was not simply grotesque. Haruspicy, the reading of the future in the organs of sacrificed animals, was one of the primary religious technologies of the ancient Near East. Humbaba's face, assembled from intestines, was a living inscription, a divine message written in guts, walking through the cedar forest. He was not a rogue monster. He was the appointed guardian of that forest, placed there by the god Enlil, holding legitimate supernatural authority over sacred territory. The Epic of Gilgamesh exists in versions spanning from roughly 2100 BCE to the standard Babylonian version of around 1200 BCE. 900 years of copying, revision, and expansion. Across all of it, Humbaba's role remains structurally the same, a legitimate official who becomes a target. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu reach him, Humbaba begs for his life. The text records his pleading. They kill him anyway. His death contributes to the divine anger that eventually kills Enkidu. The text understood that even killing a legitimate monster leaves a debt. He is one of the earliest literary monsters given a voice, not just a threat to be neutralized, a voice that was heard and deliberately ignored. Apep, every morning the sun rose over ancient Egypt, was proof that Apep had been defeated again the night before, and every night that was not guaranteed. Apep, Apophis to the Greeks, was not a demon. He was Isfet, the principle of chaos itself, the formless void that preceded creation and pressed perpetually against its edges. Every other entity on this list was created. Apep preceded creation. He was not evil's representative in the world. He was the alternative to the world. Egyptian temples maintained a formal daily ritual documented in the Bremner Rind papyrus, dating to the 4th century BCE. Priests drew his image, inscribed curses upon it, spat on it, stabbed it with a flint knife, and burned the wax effigy, all to weaken him before each night's battle. He had no temples, no worshippers, no offerings except destruction. Even Set, who murdered his own brother Osiris and dismembered the body, served a heroic function by standing at the prow of Ra's bark with a spear, fighting Apep every single night. The most transgressive figure in the Egyptian pantheon was also its most reliable soldier, because some threats make every other conflict irrelevant. Apep was not a character with a story. He was the thing the story was told to keep away. Set, he is the only figure on this list whose transformation into a demon you can watch happen across the historical record. Set is one of the oldest attested Egyptian gods, present from the earliest pre-dynastic periods around 3100 BCE, and for much of Egyptian history, he was legitimate, worshipped, and invoked with full royal sanction. Pharaohs bore names invoking his power. He was venerated as the protector of Ra's solar bark against Apep. Then he murdered his brother Osiris, dismembered the body, scattered the pieces. The turning point in his reputation came not from theology but from politics. The Hyksos, a foreign dynasty ruling Egypt from approximately 1650 to 1550 BCE, adopted Set as their chief deity. After their expulsion, his association with foreign rule made him increasingly dangerous to acknowledge. His name was erased from monuments. His image was defaced across the country, over centuries through a process scholars explicitly call the demonization of Set. A legitimate god became a demon through accumulated cultural anxiety about what he had come to represent. No theological council voted on it. No scripture declared it. It happened the way most demonizations happen, through association, repetition, and the slow consensus of a civilization deciding what it needed its gods to look like. Set did not change. His context did. Every culture has figures whose reputation follows this trajectory. The mechanism is always the same. Angra Mainyu. Every other demon on this list operates within a cosmos that a good god created and ultimately controls. Angra Mainyu does not. In Zoroastrian theology, rooted in the Gathas attributed to the prophet Zarathustra, the universe is a battlefield between two co-eternal principles, Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. Neither created the other, neither precedes the other. They are not in a hierarchy, they are in a war. This was theologically radical. Every other ancient religious system placed destructive forces within a cosmos ultimately governed by a good, or at least dominant, divine authority. Zoroastrianism did not. At the primordial moment of existence, Angra Mainyu chose his orientation deliberately. The Bundahishan, a Pahlavi text compiling older oral traditions, records his counter-creation with systematic precision. Winter to oppose warmth, disease to oppose health, death to oppose life, every poison and parasite introduced as a deliberate corruption of every good thing Ahura Mazda made. He will be defeated at the end of time. Frashakaredi, the renovation of the world, is one of the earliest eschatological narratives in human religious history. He will lose. He just hasn't yet. Scholars widely argue that Zoroastrian dualism directly influenced the development of Satan in Jewish and later Christian theology during the Achaemenid Persian period, roughly 550 to 330 BCE, when Jewish communities lived as subjects of the Persian Empire. The hypothesis is extensive and serious. It remains a hypothesis. Every religious tradition that wrestles with why a good God permits suffering borrows this structure, whether it knows it or not. Angra Mainyu is the reason the question has an answer that doesn't require blaming the god. Lilith, she appears exactly once in the Hebrew Bible, in Isaiah 34:14, a single word, Lilith, in a passage describing the desolation of Edom, listed among wild creatures inhabiting ruins. Translators have rendered that word as screech owl, night creature, night hag, and Lilith. Whether the text intends a supernatural entity at all is a genuine scholarly question. The fully developed mythology, first wife of Adam, created equally from the earth, who refuses subjugation, speaks the ineffable name of God, and flees, appears in the alphabet of Ben Sirei, a medieval text composed roughly between the 7th and 10th centuries CE. Not ancient scripture. The first wife narrative is medieval. This is a documented textual history, not a disputed claim. The protective amulet tradition associated with her, however, is genuinely ancient. Inscribed amulets naming the three angels sent to pursue her were used in Jewish households to protect infants for centuries before the medieval mythology existed. The anxiety that produced the amulets preceded the story that explained them. What Lilith accumulated over 2 millennia was the roll of a canvas. Generation after generation projected onto her figure whatever it most needed to contain. Infant mortality, female autonomy, the terror of equality in a tradition structured around hierarchy. She began as a single ambiguous word in a desolation poem. She became whatever each century most needed her to be. That is not the history of a demon. That is the history of a mirror. Ravana. He had 10 heads, each representing a different domain of knowledge. He was king of Lanka, a city of gold. He had obtained near invincibility through decades of ascetic practice so intense that Brahma himself granted him protection from death at the hands of gods and demons. He was a master of the Vedas, a composer of hymns to Shiva, genuinely accomplished, recognized within the tradition as a figure of extraordinary spiritual and intellectual achievement. The Ramayana, in its oldest form somewhere between 500 and 300 BCE, does not present a simple villain. It presents a figure whose capacities are not in question, only his choices. His fatal flaw was hubris in its precise technical form. He had specifically not requested protection from humans, considering them beneath his notice, not anticipating that Rama would be the human avatar of Vishnu. He had planned for every threat worth taking seriously. He had simply miscategorized the one that killed him. He is genuinely venerated in parts of India and Sri Lanka. He has temples. He has devotees. His effigy is burned annually across India at Dussehra in front of millions of people, some of whom will also tell you they respect him. He is the only demon on this list who burns every year in front of people who also keep his temples. The tradition holds the contradiction without resolving it, because the contradiction is the point. Mara. He sent an army first, demons of every configuration, weapons of fire, arrows that would have destroyed anything else. The man sitting beneath the Bodhi tree did not move. Then Mara sent his 3 daughters, Tanha, Arati, and Raga, craving, aversion, and passion, to seduce and distract him. The man beneath the tree did not respond. The army dissolved. The daughters withdrew. Siddhartha Gautama attained enlightenment. Mara, whose name in Sanskrit and Pali simply means death, is the adversary in the Pali Canon, the foundational scriptures of Theravada Buddhism, written down in approximately the 1st century BCE. He is simultaneously the god of the pleasure realm, the personification of desire, the lord of the cycle of rebirth, and the force of everything that keeps beings attached to suffering. His defeat is unique in the history of demonology. The Buddha did not slay him, did not bind him, trick him, or exile him. He simply remained equanimous, and Mara had no purchase on someone with nothing left to attach to. Every weapon the demon possessed operated through desire, fear, or the need for things to be different than they are. A mind without those vulnerabilities left him nothing to work with. He keeps returning in the Pali texts, trying to plant doubt, trying to find some angle that still works, and the Buddha defeats him every time the same way. I see you, Mara. Recognition without reaction. Every other demon on this list requires a weapon, a ritual, a text, a password, a hero, or a blacksmith's apron raised in fury. Mara requires only clarity. He is the most honest demon ever conceived, the one that relies entirely on your willingness to be deceived. He is the moment the demon stopped being out there and became a description of what happens in here when you stop paying attention. 10 demons. Mesopotamia, Sumer, Babylonia, Egypt, Iran, Israel, India, Buddhist tradition. None of them are simply evil. Pazuzu is a protector. The Gallu are indifferent rather than cruel. And the distinction is more frightening. Humbaba had a voice that was heard and ignored. Set was a god before he was a demon, and the transformation was political. Lilith is a mirror. Ravana burns every year in front of people who also respect him. Mara is a description of the inside of a mind that has not yet learned to see clearly. The question that runs underneath all of them is the one every tradition eventually had to face. Who decides what counts as a demon? The answer, across every tradition here, is identical. The people who needed something to be one. The thing that killed without explanation. the force that could not be negotiated with, the power that had to be expelled or conscripted or named and denied its leverage. Every demon is a decision a civilization made about what evil looks like, what it wants, and whether it can be defeated. The civilizations changed. The decision kept being made. It is still being made now. We just call it by different names, and some of them, if you look carefully enough, sound remarkably like the ones on this list.